evening and welcome again to Capitol Report on WCMU Public Television. I'm David Nicholas. We welcome back to our program Senator Rick Outman from Six Lakes. He is serving in his first term as Senator for the 33rd District. That includes Clare, Gratiot, Isabella, Mecosta, and Montcalm counties. Thank you, Senator, for joining us once again.
Well, thanks for inviting me. I appreciate it.
We are sitting down the day after Governor Gretchen Whitmer has submitted her budget proposal for fiscal year 2022 that begins October 1st. And before we get very far into that, I wonder what the status is as we sit down today and the juncture for the balance of the current fiscal year, given all of the extraordinary circumstances we've come through in the past several months.
Well, so we are going to put forth a supplemental that will kind of finish spending the one-time federal monies that we got. We're focusing on shoring up our UIA system because that's really been, it seems like an abysmal failure as far as getting people the benefits that some of them have been waiting for since last spring. And but other than that, we're focusing on vaccine distribution, and we're focusing on continued support for direct care workers and opening schools, everything that's COVID related. We don't want to do long-term commitments because we know so much of it is one-time monies. And so that's kind of where we're going with it.
And that is something that our guest for the first 2 weeks, political analyst Bill Ballinger, pointed out, that the federal dollars really came in to shore up the picture for this year's budget, and there are expectations with the new administration that we might see that for this year. But he noted, and I wonder about your thoughts of maybe significant problems coming up for next year and the year after, and that's also in the analysis that the Detroit News reported on in their release of the governor's budget yesterday, is that despite all the circumstances, we might be okay for now, but it is when those one-time monies if we see another round or two or whatever of that, that's one thing. But when we get beyond that, then what will the real state of Michigan's economy be?
Yeah, certainly. The only reason that we've done well is because the federal government's come to the rescue. And if they hadn't, we would be in a lot worse shape than we are. And that's common sense. I mean, you shut down businesses, you shut down the economy. You shut down the economy, you shut down revenues to the state. And so, I mean, if the federal government hadn't come through, we would be in a world of hurt. But they mitigated those circumstances, and we tightened our belts. And so the combination of the two, and we came out pretty good. Looking forward, again, it really is dependent on how much federal monies are going to come. And, really the best cure will be opening up the economy. I mean, we need to do that. We have to figure out a way to do that. Vaccine distribution certainly will be a key role in that.
What are the expectations right now for any additional funding? Are we talking about a series of potential relief packages, one more major relief package? What is the sense that all of you in Lansing are taking as a realistic picture based on what you've heard so far from the new Biden administration?
We're not going to take anything for granted. We're going to tighten our belts as if it's us going it alone, and then it'll be their normal monies coming through, and everything else will be, just not surplus. Don't get me wrong, but it'll be relief.
Do you think that the overview that the governor laid out in the State of the State a couple of weeks ago has now been reflected? I mean, that there's always the address, and then how closely is that tied to some of the specifics in the line items that come out in the proposed budget? Looking back at that speech and your take on that, how closely do you think this budget proposal mirrors or reflects or extends the themes that were laid out in that address?
Well, I'm optimistic that what they laid out yesterday in the budget presentation is what they're putting forward, because it actually coincides with a lot of the stuff that we said. I mean, it's actually kind of ironic because many of the things that she's proposing are the very things that she vetoed in some of our supplementals and some of our ongoing budget negotiations from last year. So whether she's changed her position, or, and I shouldn't say she, I mean, she doesn't go it alone. She's got an administration, but whether that administration has changed its tune and you know, thought better of it, or just came to an agreement, or maybe it's through, she knows that maybe this year she's going to come to the table and say, it's time to work together. Let's negotiate. That would be a wonderful change of pace. So if that's the case, we're certainly willing. We're getting tired of being talked to. We certainly would rather be talked with. And, it should be an ongoing conversation, not just here's what we're going to do. And if you don't do it, I'm going to go around you. That seemed to be the case with the things that she was suggesting, because it does coincide with a lot of the things that we agreed with. So I'm cautiously optimistic.
Other people's headlines, not mine, but labeled as a standoff between particularly your body, the Senate, and Senate Majority Leader Mike Shirkey and the governor over the use of executive powers, of which you spoke. And when we look at how things have played out over the last several months during the pandemic, and now the at least reported hold up on some of the governor's appointees, is there a point where somebody needs to make another gesture here to break that? Her dialogue in the speech was certainly one of unity, coming together. Does not, to at least from the observations, and you pointed this out as well, that was not the case certainly over this past year. What will now change that theme and that approach on both sides?
Look, I don't want to be harsh, but talk is cheap, and so you can say all the nice things that you want, and you can say you want to bring unity. The proof is in the pudding. The value, the genius of our system is that we are a citizen-led legislature. And particularly with term limits, you're always getting fresh faces in those legislative positions. And with that fresh face, hopefully comes people who think outside the box. They don't think like Lansing thinks. Me as an excavator, I come with that background of a small business owner. A teacher comes with that background of education, and a lawyer comes with that background, and whatever. We can go on and on and on. And so, and the other beauty of it is not just that you come with your background, but you also come with the background of your constituency. It isn't the administration surrounded by people from, I don't know, Detroit or Lansing, that are trying to make decisions for people outside of that area. We come with a specific background, but we also come not just a background of our work, but a background of our communities. And we speak for those people. And that's the beauty in it. And she should take advantage of that, because we as a body, as a state, have a lot of good ideas, and we could help. Let's hope that happens.
You mentioned and have elaborated now on that idea of the Republican lawmakers being left out of the process. And earlier you even used the phrase the governor going it alone, and then said the administration as a whole. So I want to make that clear as well. But I wonder, you work obviously very closely with a lot of the members in the Democratic caucus. They are your colleagues in the legislature. What have you heard from them as to the degree of their involvement? Is this at least the perception that the executive orders and it wasn't the governor necessarily not talking with members of the majority party in both chambers, but has she, from what you've heard, even consulted with the members of her own party's caucus in either the House or Senate on any of this?
So when people have asked me that question, I always had to amend my statement, because I always said, a lot of times prematurely, I'd say she doesn't work with the legislature. And then I had to correct myself because I really had to say she doesn't work with the Republican side of the legislature. Whether she works with the Democratic side of the legislature, I don't know. Because if she is, they're not telling, which I get. That doesn't mean that we don't get along. I actually sit on the Democratic side of the chamber because we have more Republicans than we do have Democrats, and the chamber split in half. And And so there were three of us. Now there's two of us sitting on that side. And so my seatmate is Paul Voino, who is a Democratic senator from somewhere in Detroit, and actually one of my best friends down there. We have a great working relationship, and we work hard to hopefully co-sponsor each other's legislation. That's how good of friends we've become. But if we can't do that, at least support each other in voting yes on the legislation. But in the absence of that, we give each other heck for running the crap that they're running, in good-natured fun. But we get along, and it isn't this animosity. And there's a lot of that going on. That just doesn't make the news. The news is we fight, and knock down drag-outs and whatever, and that's what sells. That's what sells papers. That's what sells ratings. By and large, there are so many times when we get along, and that. There's so much bipartisan legislation that goes through. It just doesn't make the news.
The path to reopening the state's economy as a whole, or even in some sectors or some geographic corners, this has been the big area of contention. We have the regions, and even within some of the regions, some areas have been more adversely affected by some of the limitations and the backtracking for further shutdowns and restrictions over the last several months. In your district, a 5-county district, what has been the reaction from the constituents? If you take the numbers of cases, the numbers of the serious cases, the impact on the schools, the numbers of businesses that have been dealing with this, within that 5-county district, your 33rd, where do you feel you're at in terms of being ready to safely reopen all, or at least much more, of that economy in that area?
All right. Well, I certainly think we could open a lot more of it. The 25% capacity in restaurants just seems like a random number that was drawn out of a hat. And from all the studies that I've seen and listened to, it doesn't seem like restaurants contribute to a lot of the spread of the disease. And quite frankly, a lot of people are going out of state to enjoy going out to restaurants. Matter of fact, along with a lot of athletes, they're, if you're in wrestling, if you're in hockey, and probably basketball and other winter sports, but particularly those are the two that I really follow. And those kids are going Wisconsin, Indiana, Ohio. My nieces actually went down to North or South Carolina to compete in some hockey tournaments. And when they go there, they're eating out. It's open. And they don't seem to have any higher incidence of COVID than we do. So I really question, why we're staying closed. A lot of it probably depends on your pocketbook, and how it affects you financially. I mean, that's just how we're wired. We're a species of people that look at life through the lens of your pocketbook. And if it's adversely affected you, then you question the validity of what we're doing. If you benefited from it, or if you haven't been hurt at least by it, you may be a little more compassionate to the administration's rules and say, well, she kept us safe. So much of it is just your viewpoint, but again, a lot of your viewpoint is based on your pocketbook.
Speaking today, it's the end of the first full week with the resumption of the winter sports, and you mentioned the number of young people that have looked for those opportunities elsewhere. How has that gone so far for the reopening of, in particular, the sports, but overall, even coming out of the extended holiday break, the beginning of this now winter semester, when it comes to the schools? How has that transition gone so far?
Well, there's been a lot of problems with it, as far as, are we virtual? Are we not virtual? A lot of kids have been jockeying schools because they struggle with one mode or the other, or, for whatever reason, whether they want to stay safe and they'd rather be virtual, or whether they don't perform well in a virtual setting and they'd rather be in person. So we see a lot of that. We see a lot of kids that have just dropped out. You just can't find them. They're just not there. And certainly that's a problem with count day that we had, yesterday or 2 days ago. Um, One of the things that I'm working on right now is they have a vaccine reporting requirement that annually, it isn't a COVID vaccine, it's just their normal requirement. And a lot of these kids, if you don't have, I think like 95% of them vaccinated, then you lose up to 5% of your state funding. I'm not sure of the numbers. The 5% funding I'm sure of. And what these administrators are telling me is those kids that are virtual, and some of them aren't virtual even in their school, but they're still liable for them when it comes to this reporting requirement. They could lose their funding, or at least 5% of it. And that's a substantial part of it. And so that's a huge problem that we're working on right now, actually.
Is it a clear enough picture, though, Senator? Because we don't want to minimize in any way the public health aspect, those that have suffered, those that have lost their lives. But when we start looking at these real impacts on what it has done to the students who have not been able to maintain, for whatever numbers of reasons, learning virtually in the classroom, and also the numbers of particularly smaller businesses that have or soon will no longer be able to continue, that will fail. Do we have a clear enough picture as to that toll that the pandemic has taken? How do you best balance looking at this with the respect and the sympathy needed to look at it from the public health aspect, but also what these measures have done to these other factors?
Well, certainly we aren't going to know the full impact on learning, on mental health, on our economy. How many, if we're talking businesses, how many restaurants are going to close and stay closed for good because they just couldn't weather the storm? I don't think we know the answer to that yet. But what I do know is the longer we do this, the worse it's going to get. I mean, that's a given. We've got to figure out a way to get this opened up again. Get the vaccines out there to mitigate those circumstances, and then I don't know. I don't know what the answer is because we're not engaging in the conversation. This is the governor and the administration going it alone, and that's been our consternation all along. And she says that she's relying on science and data, and we just say, show us what that is, because the science and data that we see just doesn't add up. And science and data, a lot of times science is just theoretical. But again, you look at what other states are doing, and they don't have increased incidence of COVID-19, and that should be, kind of an indicator that maybe we're being too cautious. And again, you're right, not to minimize the health risks. Certainly, so many families have felt, the sting of people passing away because of this. That, and they can say they had comorbidities. It doesn't matter what they say. The fact of the matter is, if it hadn't been for COVID-19, they probably would still be here. And you do have to balance that, certainly.
The governor has said we've got the plan, and you just mentioned, again, emphasized the aspect of getting the vaccines out to people. The governor is now saying, we have the plan, we can ramp this up. It is, and this complaint goes back to the final portion of the Trump administration, but it is carried over now into the early days of this new administration, that the supply is not there. Now, you talk certainly directly with your local health care providers, your local health departments across the 5 counties that you serve. Do they feel that they would be ready to go if the supply is there, or do they point to Lansing and say, do they have any questions about the plan? How well prepared do they feel in terms of continuing to fight this fight?
I know my local health department, which is a 3-county district, the Bend, Michigan District Health Department, who I've dealt with for years in my industry of excavating, they've said that they don't have enough vaccines. That they run out before they're able to deliver vaccinations quicker than they can get the supply, or at least they said that couple weeks ago. Whether that's changed since then, I know they're ramping up the supply. We do have hospitals that are saying, look, if you need help, we can help. We can reach segments of the population maybe quicker than health departments, but there is value in health departments too. So we're looking at everything. We are. Again, that doesn't mean that the administration is, but certainly in our supplementals, we're increasing funding for that specific, endeavor. And, I think no matter which side of the aisle you're on or which branch of the government you're in, that we've got to do it quicker. We've got to do it better. We better figure it out.
Numbers can get confusing sometimes if you don't have all the figures or charts and so forth, which today we don't have. But there was a figure of $5.3 billion that the governor was calling for to continue the efforts to prevent and deal with COVID-19. You're now serving as chair of the Appropriations Subcommittee on Community Health and Human Services, another $2 billion. Are we talking then $2 billion to be allocated from anticipated federal funds? Is that where the governor is drawing this $5.3 billion figure from? Where exactly is that money coming from, and what right now is creating that difference between one figure and the other?
So it's certainly federal money. And the reason that we've done such a reduced amount is not that we aren't anticipating using the entire amount. We want to do it we don't want to just overload the system, just give the money and have it wasted. We want to be very appropriate with it. And so as we continue to improve the way we're doing things, we'll keep allocating money. That's kind of the thought process behind how we're doing it. Because even the House plan offered more than we did. I mean, the House plan was like $3.5 billion. The governor's was $5 billion. We offered $2.2 billion. And so it's just a more cautious approach. It isn't the end of it. We're just saying, let's offer that first. Let's take a look at it, but certainly not stall anything out. Just let's be judicious with our spending.
You say that you are maintaining, you're supporting the governor's called for maintaining a $2 an hour increase for direct care workers. Do we know would this revert post-pandemic, or would this then be a permanent increase just given the times that we live in? And if there is any change or a review, how do we reach consensus on when the pandemic is over?
Right. Yeah, and that I don't know, but certainly I think in her budget proposal it did talk about keeping that even post-COVID. I can't remember for sure, and we've talked about that. Certainly, those are jobs they're hard jobs, they're thankless jobs. They're a lot of times very physical. My wife was a nurse aide for years. And the physical toll it takes on you is pretty tough, and the emotional toll. But so I'm sympathetic to that, and I would say that we do need to try to find a way to keep that, because there is such a shortage of direct care workers too, especially when you talk about nursing home or long-term care. That's a tough job to attract people to when you go to McDonald's and make the same amount of money and flipping burgers. So
just a couple of minutes left with you, Senators. School funding and the ongoing call for closing the gap. How much of a gap is there still from high end compared to the state's rural or more smaller districts? And has this been impacted more because of COVID-19? You're now vice chair of Appropriations Subcommittee for K-12 and Michigan Department of Education. What are your thoughts on this?
So I think with the governor's proposal, the 2X formula, which is what we've always proposed every year since I've been in the legislature. Last year, she'd proposed a 1.5X program. We pushed back and said, no, we're going to stick with the 2X because we want, especially, I don't want to speak for our appropriations chair, Senator Thomas, but I was at a meeting with him an ISD meeting up in Cadillac, and he had said he'd like to see that gap deleted by the time he got out of office. And I think what did the governor's budget director say? I think we're within $336 per pupil. I could be wrong on that, but we're shrinking it pretty well, and we do want to continue that. It's a little bit deceiving because there's a lot of federal monies that are going to certain areas of the state that we don't take into consideration with that, and so temporarily the disparity is quite large. But again, a lot of that is just COVID dollars. So.
Well, it is a program that would seem like that's all we have talked about is one issue, but it has impacted everything that has been going on over the last several months and moving forward. But we wish you, Senator, continued good health in dealing with it, not only for the 5 counties that you serve in the 33rd, but also on behalf of representing all the people in the state. And thank you so much for taking the time again to talk with us as we move forward here into the first, hope for, better months of 2021. Thanks again for joining us.
Thanks, Dave.
And thank you for being with us as well. We've been speaking with State Senator Rick Outman in his first term for the 33rd Senate District of Michigan. I'm David Nicholas on behalf of all of us here at WCMU. Remember, you can follow the programs online by going to our website at WCMU.org. Our guest next week, Democratic State Representative Sarah Anthony, will be joining us. We hope to see you then, and take care.